What if the man no one else could see was the only one telling the truth? And when justice hangs by a thread, would you trust the evidence or the ghost watching you? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's story is The Trial for Murder by Charles Dickens, a classic story reimagined and retold for the modern age.
I've always found it strange how even the sharpest minds grow quiet when the conversation turns inward. People will argue facts, debate evidence, describe the physical world down to the smallest detail. But the moment something unexplainable happens inside their own heads, something they can't prove, can't measure, they shut down. They hesitate. They smile it off. Or worse, they bury it completely. A man could stand before you and swear he saw something impossible rise from the ocean, a creature no one believes exists, and he'd tell the story without fear. But let that same man admit he felt an unshakable warning, saw something that wasn't there, dreamed something too real to ignore, and suddenly he doubts himself. Not because it didn't happen, but because no one else might understand it. And so, most of these experiences never leave the mind they were born in. They fade, or they fester. That silence, that quiet refusal to speak, is exactly why moments like these remain so rare. Not because they don't happen, but because they are almost never shared. Now, before I go any further, understand this. I am not here to prove anything. I'm not offering a theory, and I'm not asking you to believe in one. I've read the documented cases. I've studied accounts written by respected men, analyzed stories that others have dismissed or tried to explain away. I've even witnessed something disturbingly similar within my own circle. But what I'm about to tell you has no easy explanation. It didn't come from imagination. It wasn't inherited, suggested, or influenced by anything I had known before. And it has never happened to me again. Not once. This began with a murder. It happened in England some years ago. The exact time doesn't matter. What matters is the impact it had. The case drew attention, the kind that grips a nation for a moment, then fades as the next horror takes its place. You've seen it happen. Names rise, crimes explode into headlines, and then everything disappears, buried under time and indifference. I won't give you the man's name. He doesn't deserve to be remembered. Let's just say he was exactly where men like him always end up, buried, forgotten. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. At the very beginning, when the murder first came to light, no one suspected him. Or at least, no one said they did. Not a whisper in the papers, not a hint in public. His name didn't exist in the story, not yet. And that detail matters more than you might think, because it means what happened next couldn't have been influenced by anything I had read. That morning, I was at breakfast, unfolding my newspaper like any other day. The headline caught my attention immediately, a brutal discovery described in just enough detail to unsettle the mind. I found myself drawn in, more than usual. I read it once, then again, and then a third time. Something about it refused to let go. And that's when it happened. The moment I lowered the paper, something moved, not in the room, not exactly, but through it. A sudden rush, a flicker, like reality slipping for the briefest second. I struggle to name it even now. It was as if another place had been forced into mine. A bedroom, not mine, drifting across my vision like an image painted on flowing water. It passed through the space in front of me, silent and impossible, yet terrifyingly clear. I saw the bed. I saw the room. And I remember one detail with absolute certainty. The body wasn't there. Then it was gone, just like that. The entire thing lasted no more than a heartbeat, but it left something behind. A cold shiver ran through me so sharply it jolted my chair backward. The movement startled me, though I later told myself it was nothing. The wheels beneath the chair made that easy to explain. Easy, but not convincing. I needed air. I stood quickly and crossed to the window, pushing my thoughts aside, letting the outside world ground me again. Below, Piccadilly was alive, bright, restless, ordinary. It was one of those crisp autumn mornings where everything seems sharper, clearer. The wind was strong, sweeping through the street, carrying dry leaves from the park. As I watched, a sudden gust gathered them into a spiraling column, a twisting pillar of gold and brown that danced for a moment before collapsing back into chaos. And that's when I saw them. Two men across the street, moving in the same direction, west to east, one ahead of the other. The first walked quickly, almost nervously, glancing back over his shoulder again and again, as if he felt something closing in on him. The second followed at a steady pace, about 30 steps behind, his right hand raised, not waving, not calling out, raised like a threat. The gesture was deliberate, fixed, unmistakable. And yet, no one else reacted. The street moved on as if nothing was wrong. Carriages passed, people walked, conversations continued. No one turned their head, no one noticed the silent tension stretching between those two men. But I did, and I couldn't look away. The two men moved through the crowd in a way that didn't feel right. They didn't push past anyone. They didn't slow down. It was as if the flow of people simply adjusted around them, without noticing, without resistance. No shoulders brushed against them. No one stepped aside. No one even glanced in their direction. They passed through the living, breathing street like shadows. And then, just as they came level with my windows, both of them looked up, directly at me. Not vaguely, not by chance. They saw me. I froze. Their faces were clear, too clear, the kind of clarity that doesn't fade, that imprints itself somewhere deep in the mind. I knew in that instant that I would recognize them again, anywhere, under any circumstance. There was nothing exaggerated about their features, nothing grotesque, and yet the man in front carried a darkness in his expression, something heavy and brooding, as if the weight of something unseen pressed down on him. The one behind, his face had a strange, unnatural tone, not pale, not sick, but something closer to wax, dull, lifeless, almost unfinished. And then they were gone, swallowed by the moving street. I lived alone, a bachelor, with only my valet and his wife managing the quiet machinery of my daily life. My work kept me in the city, tied to a bank, where responsibility weighed heavier than most would imagine. People often assume such positions are easy. They are not. That autumn, I felt it more than ever. Not ill exactly, but far from well. There was a dull fatigue that clung to me, a sense of repetition, of days blending into one another without distinction. Even my doctor, an authority in his field, insisted there was nothing seriously wrong. Just fatigue, he called it. Perhaps, but it didn't feel that simple. As the details of the murder slowly spread through the city, gripping the public imagination, I made a deliberate effort to avoid them. I didn't want the case in my head. I didn't want its images, its implications creeping into my thoughts. Still, some facts are impossible to escape. I knew a man had been accused. I knew a verdict of deliberate murder had already been declared against him. And I knew he now sat in Newgate, waiting for trial. The proceedings had been delayed, public opinion too strong, the defense unprepared, everything pushed forward to a later session of the court. Beyond that, I kept myself in the dark. Or, at least, I tried to. My rooms were arranged simply, everything on one floor, a sitting room, a bedroom, and beyond that, a dressing room. The only way into the last was through the bedroom itself. There had once been another door, a separate exit leading to the staircase, but it had long since been sealed, covered, forgotten, part of an old renovation. The door was still there, technically, but it hadn't been used in years, and no one ever thought about it anymore. No one until later.
It was late that night when everything shifted from strange to something far more disturbing. I was standing in my bedroom, giving a few final instructions to my servant before he retired. The room was quiet, dimly lit, the kind of stillness that settles just before sleep. I was facing the door that led into the dressing room, the only way in or out of it, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was closed. My servant stood opposite me, his back to that very door. I was in the middle of a sentence when it opened, slowly, silently, and someone looked in. A man. He didn't speak, didn't step forward. He simply stood there, half hidden by the doorway, and raised his hand, beckoning to me, urgent, intent, as if whatever he wanted, he needed it now. And I knew him. I knew that face, the same man I had seen in the street, the one with that lifeless, waxen complexion. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he stepped back, and the door closed. I didn't hesitate. Crossing the room in an instant, I seized the handle and threw the door open. I already had a candle in my hand, the flame steady, the light clear. The dressing room was empty, completely. No movement, no shadow, no trace of anyone, and the air inside, untouched. I became aware then of my servant behind me. He hadn't moved. I turned to him, trying to steady my voice. "Derek," I said, almost forcing a smile, "would you believe that in my full senses I imagined I saw a—" I reached out and placed my hand on his chest. The reaction was immediate. He recoiled violently, his whole body trembling as if struck by something unseen. "Oh, Lord, yes, sir," he gasped. "A dead man beckoning." That answer stopped me cold, because I knew something he didn't. I hadn't finished my sentence. I hadn't told him what I thought I saw. And yet he said it. Exactly. Even now, I cannot believe he truly saw anything before that moment. I am convinced completely that whatever he felt, whatever image formed in his mind, came from me, passed from my thoughts into his in that single instant of contact. How? I don't know, but I saw the change happen. I sent him for brandy, for both of us, and we drank it in silence. I told him nothing more, not about the figure, not about the street I had already seen once before. But I thought about it, relentlessly. There was no doubt in my mind I had never seen that man before the incident in Piccadilly, and yet now the memory of his face felt deliberate, as if during that first encounter he had made sure I would remember him, as if that moment had been preparation, and tonight he had returned to make sure I did.
Sleep did not come easily. An uneasiness settled over me, something I couldn't quite explain. And yet beneath it all, there was a strange certainty, quiet but firm, that the figure would not appear again that night. Eventually, as dawn crept in, exhaustion took over. I fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. And then I was awakened. John Derrick stood beside my bed, a newspaper in his hand, and something in his face told me this was only the beginning. The newspaper in Derrick's hand had already caused trouble before it ever reached me. There had been an argument at the door, sharp, unnecessary. Derrick, loyal as ever, had tried to turn the man away. He knew I had never been called for such a duty before, and he seemed to believe, rightly or wrongly, that men of my standing were rarely summoned for it. But the messenger didn't care. Not in the slightest. He handed over the document with complete indifference, as if it were nothing more than a routine inconvenience. "Whether he comes or not," the man had said coldly, "is none of my concern. The summons has been delivered. What he does next is his own risk." And with that, he left. It was an order, a summons to serve on a jury at the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey. For a day or two I let it sit unanswered. I turned it over in my mind, weighing the inconvenience, the obligation, the disruption to my already restless state. And yet I felt nothing unusual pulling me toward it, no strange instinct, no hidden pressure guiding my decision. Nothing. At least, nothing I could name. In the end, I chose to go, not out of duty, not out of curiosity, but simply to break the dull, suffocating repetition of my days. I had no idea what I was walking into. The morning of my attendance arrived wrapped in a thick November fog. Piccadilly was buried under it, dense, brown, suffocating, and the further east I went, the worse it became. By the time I passed Temple Bar, the air had turned almost black, heavy enough to press against the lungs with every breath.
The city felt muted, as if something were waiting. Inside the courthouse, the world changed. Gaslight burned harshly along the corridors, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. The staircases were crowded, the air thick with movement and murmurs. Everything felt close, compressed, alive in an uneasy way. I was guided through the passageways, pushed along by officers, until at last I was brought into the courtroom itself. Only then did I realize how full it was, packed, overflowing, and only then, though I cannot swear it with absolute certainty, did the thought truly strike me. This was that case, the murder. I took my place among the other jurors, trying to steady myself as I looked out over the room. The fog had followed us inside, mingling with the warmth of bodies and breath, creating a low, suffocating haze that blurred the edges of everything. Beyond the tall windows, the darkness pressed in like a curtain. Outside, the sounds of the city were dulled, wheels grinding softly over the street, voices merging into a distant hum, broken now and then by a shout or a sharp whistle cutting through the gloom. Inside, there was tension, waiting. Then the judges entered, 2 of them. The moment they took their seats, the noise in the courtroom collapsed into silence, not gradually, suddenly, as if the air itself had been stilled. An order was given, clear, unavoidable. "Bring in the prisoner." He stepped forward, into the light, into view, and in that exact moment, my blood ran cold, because I knew him. I had seen him before, not in a courtroom, not in a newspaper, but out there in the open street. He was the first man,
the one who walked ahead, the one who kept looking back. If my name had been called first, I don't think I could have spoken. My throat had tightened the moment I recognized him. My thoughts blurred, my body slow to respond. But fate, or chance, placed my name further down the list. 6th, perhaps 8th. Enough time for me to gather myself. When it was finally called, I managed a steady, "Here," and I stepped forward. The moment I entered the jury box, everything changed. The prisoner had been watching the room with calm detachment until then, composed, almost indifferent. But the instant his eyes locked onto mine, he broke. Not subtly, not quietly, violently. His entire demeanor shifted, his face drained, his body tensed, and he immediately leaned toward his attorney, gesturing urgently, whispering with clear agitation. Even from where I stood, it was obvious what he wanted. He wanted me gone. There was a pause in the proceedings, a noticeable one. The attorney listened, hand resting on the edge of the dock, then slowly shook his head. Later, I would learn what had passed between them. The prisoner's first words were sharp, desperate. At all hazards, challenge that man. But when pressed for a reason, any reason at all, he had none. He admitted he didn't know me, had never seen me, had only heard my name moments before. And that was not enough. So I remained. I will not dwell on the details of the trial itself. The world had already heard enough of that man, more than enough. His name, his crime, they deserve to fade, not to be revived here. What matters is not what he did, but what happened to me. What unfolded over the 10 days and nights that followed. Because that is where the true story lies. I was appointed foreman of the jury, a position of order, responsibility, control, at least in theory. On the second morning of the trial, something began to slip. The court had been in session for a couple of hours. I remember hearing the distant chime of church bells marking the time. It was then, almost absent-mindedly, that I glanced across my fellow jurors and felt something wrong. I tried to count them, once, then again, and again. Each time I hesitated. Something didn't add up. I counted carefully, focusing on each face, each figure seated in place. Every man was accounted for, and yet there was one too many. I leaned slightly toward the man beside me. "Would you mind," I whispered, keeping my voice low, "counting us?" He looked at me, puzzled but obliged. He turned, scanned the group, counting under his breath, then suddenly stopped. "Why," he muttered, "we are He caught himself. A pause. A frown. Then more firmly, "No, that's not possible. We are 12. 12. Of course we were. We had to be. And yet, no matter how many times I counted that day, the result never changed. Individually, everything made sense. But as a whole, there was always one extra. There was no shape, no figure, nothing visible to explain it, and still, I felt it. A quiet, creeping certainty forming in the back of my mind that something unseen had already taken its place among us, and that soon it would reveal itself. During the trial, we were kept together at all times, lodged under supervision at the London Tavern, 12 men always together, sleeping in the same large room, each assigned his own narrow table for rest, watched constantly by the officer appointed to ensure no outside influence reached us. A necessary precaution, under normal circumstances. The officer in charge of us was a man named Harker. I see no reason to hide his name. He was everything one might expect: sharp, composed, attentive, polite in manner, well respected, with a presence that commanded quiet confidence, clear eyes, dark whiskers, a voice that carried authority without effort, a man you would trust without question. And yet, even then, I cannot say why, but something about those days felt watched, not just by the court, not just by the law, but by something else, something that had already entered the room and taken its place among us. At night, we were locked in together. 12 beds, 1 room, no separation, no escape. And across the only door, placed there with quiet authority, was Mr. Harker's bed, a living barrier. On the second night, sleep wouldn't come to me. The room was dim, heavy with the slow breathing of men who had already surrendered to rest. Harker was still awake, sitting upright on his bed near the door, watchful as ever. I joined him. We spoke little, just enough to fill the silence. At one point, I offered him a pinch of snuff, extending the small box toward him. His fingers brushed mine, and instantly he shuddered. A sharp, involuntary reaction. His eyes widened, and he turned his head slightly, staring into the room. "Who is this?" he said. I followed his gaze, and there, at last, I saw him again. The second man, the one with the waxen face. I stood without thinking and stepped forward, drawn toward the figure, but after a few paces, I stopped and glanced back at Harker. He was no longer alarmed. In fact, he laughed, softly, casually. I thought for a moment we had a 13th juryman without a bed, but it's only the moonlight. Moonlight. That was his explanation. And yet, I knew better. I said nothing. Instead, I suggested we walk to the far end of the room together, but my attention was fixed entirely on the figure, watching, studying, waiting. It moved, slowly, deliberately. It stopped beside the first bed, then the next, and the next. Each time, it stood at the right-hand side, leaning slightly forward, as if looking down at the sleeping man, not with menace, not with urgency, but something closer to quiet sorrow or judgment. Then it would move on, crossing at the foot of the bed, gliding to the next, again and again, until it had visited all 11 of my fellow jurors, all except me. It never came near my bed, not once. When it reached the end of the row, it didn't turn back. It simply rose, or it seemed to, toward the high window where pale moonlight filtered in, as if invisible steps led upward into the darkness beyond. And then it was gone. During the next morning's breakfast, a strange conversation unfolded. One by one, the jurors began to speak. Every single one of them had dreamed of the murdered man. Every one. Except myself and Mr. Harker. By then, the truth had settled inside me like something cold and immovable. The second man I had seen, the one who followed, he was no living man. He was the victim. And then, as if that realization alone were not enough, he proved it. On the 5th day of the trial, the prosecution was nearing the end. The tension in the courtroom had thickened, every detail now carrying weight. A small object was introduced into evidence, a miniature portrait. It had once belonged to the murdered man, kept in his bedroom, missing after the crime, later discovered hidden away in a place the accused had been seen digging. Identified, confirmed, important. The portrait was passed from hand to hand, from the witness to the judge, and then down toward the jury. An officer in a black gown was bringing it to me. I remember watching it approach. I remember reaching out. And then everything shifted. Out of the crowd, he came. Sudden, forceful, impossible. The figure, the dead man, he moved straight toward the officer, seized the miniature from his hands, and placed it directly into mine. His touch, cold, unnatural, real. And as he did, he spoke. His voice, low, hollow, echoing as if from a distance beyond the room. I was younger then, and my face had not yet been drained of blood. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked down at the locket in my hand, and I knew, before I even opened it, that I was about to see the same face that had followed through Piccadilly, the same face that had stood beside our beds, the same face that no one else could see. And yet, as I passed the miniature along the row, something even more impossible occurred. He moved with it, standing between me and the next juror, then between him and the next, passing it along, hand by hand, guiding it through all 12 of us, before returning it to me. Not one of them noticed, not a single one. But I did. And by then, there was no longer any doubt. He was with us, in the room, in the trial, watching, waiting for justice.
From the moment we were locked in together under Mr. Harker's watchful eye, conversation naturally turned to the trial. At the table, during idle hours and in the long evenings confined to that room, we dissected every detail of the day's proceedings, comparing notes and debating evidence. On the 5th day, when the prosecution had closed its case, our discussions became more heated. The stakes were clearer now, and the tension among the jurors thickened. Among us was a vestryman, by far the densest fool I have ever seen at large, who challenged even the simplest evidence with absurd objections. 2 flabby parochial hangers-on supported him, and the 3 of them, drawn from a district plagued by disease and squalor, seemed more likely to be tried for their own misdeeds than to serve justice. That night, as their nonsense reached its loudest, and some of us were already preparing for bed, I saw him again. The murdered man. He stood grimly behind the trio, his presence unmistakable, and yet he did nothing more than beckon to me. I moved toward him, joining the conversation, and just as quickly he retreated, vanishing from sight. It was the start of a new pattern, a private series of appearances confined to the long shadowed room where we slept, ate, and argued. Whenever a small cluster of my fellow jurors leaned together in discussion, I would glimpse the head of the murdered man among them. Whenever their conclusions strayed in favor of the accused, he would silently, irresistibly beckon me. It must be remembered that until the miniature was produced on the 5th day, I had never seen him manifest in the courtroom. But once the defense began, 3 startling changes occurred. 2 of these appeared immediately and together. First, the figure was now present in court at all times, but no longer singled me out. Instead, it addressed itself to whoever was speaking. During the opening defense, a lawyer suggested that the deceased might have taken his own life, cutting his throat. At that instant, the apparition appeared at the lawyer's elbow. The throat, now shown in its dreadful true condition concealed until that moment, was crossed in a brutal, unmistakable line. The figure gestured across the wound, first with one hand, then the other, clearly demonstrating to the speaker the impossibility of the act being self-inflicted. Later, a witness to character, a woman, declared the accused a most amiable man, and again the figure appeared, standing before her, confronting her directly. Its arm extended, finger outstretched, it silently pointed to the prisoner's true malevolent nature. It did not speak, it did not touch, yet its presence, its movements, communicated a force beyond words, an irrefutable truth impossible to ignore. Even in the midst of human debate, logic, and argument, The murdered man had returned, not to haunt the guilty, but to reveal what they could not see for themselves. The third change was the most extraordinary of all, and it impressed me more deeply than anything yet. I make no attempt to explain it. I state it as it occurred, exactly as I witnessed it, and leave theory aside. Though the apparition never seemed directly visible to those it approached, its presence affected them inevitably. A subtle yet undeniable unease followed its movement. It was as if unseen laws prevented it from fully revealing itself to others, yet allowed it to darkly overshadow their minds, whispering its silent influence without a word. The first evidence of this occurred during the defense counsel's argument for suicide. The figure appeared at his elbow, sawing at the severed throat in ghastly demonstration. Immediately the learned man faltered. His voice wavered, the thread of his argument slipped from his mind. He pressed a handkerchief to his sweating brow, paling under the weight of a fear he could not name. Later, when the witness to character was confronted by the apparition, her eyes followed the pointed finger. She hesitated, uncertain, and lingered on the prisoner's face, struck with sudden doubt and inner turmoil. 2 other incidents made the phenomenon inevitable. On the 8th day, after the afternoon recess, I returned to court with the rest of the jury, arriving slightly before the judges. Standing in the box, scanning the courtroom, I initially thought the figure absent, but as my gaze wandered to the gallery, I saw it, bending over a respectable woman in the crowd, observing whether the judges had resumed their seats. Almost immediately she screamed, collapsed in a faint, and was carried out. Even the most patient, venerable judge was not immune. When the trial resumed, and he sat to sum up, the murdered man entered by the judge's door. The figure advanced to the bench, leaning over to watch the judge's hands as he turned the pages of his notes. A sudden shiver passed over the man. He stopped mid-action. His face changed. "Excuse me, gentlemen, for a few moments," he murmured, his voice tight with a tension no one could explain. A glass of water restored him, but the effect was undeniable. It was clear the presence of the dead could reach beyond the visible, touch the living, and alter their thoughts, their actions, even their very composure, without a sound, without a word.
The courtroom, the gallery, the jury box, all were haunted in ways that left none untouched, even if they could not see the haunting itself. Through the endless, grinding monotony of 6 of those 10 interminable days, everything remained exactly as it always had. The same judges sat on the bench, the same murderer lingered in the dock, the same lawyers murmured and argued at the table, the same questions rose and fell, echoing to the high roof of the courtroom, the same scratching of pens, the same ushers moving in and out, the same lights kindled when daylight waned. The same fog hung beyond the tall windows, the same rain drummed upon the roof. Footsteps of turnkeys and prisoner marked the sawdusted floors day after day. Keys clicked and clanged, locking and unlocking the same heavy doors. Through it all, the wearisome, soul-numbing repetition that made me feel as if I had been foreman of the jury since the foundation of Babylon itself, the murdered man never lost his clarity in my vision. He remained distinct, real, and present, as sharply defined as anyone else in the room. Remarkably, I never saw him look at the murderer once. Over and over I wondered why he never did. He never did. Nor did he look at me again after the production of the miniature until the final moments of the trial. We retired to deliberate at 7 minutes before 10 that night. The idiotic vestryman and his 2 parochial parasites caused endless obstruction, forcing us twice to return to the court to have certain notes of the judge reread. 9 of us had no doubt, but the trifling trio opposed us simply to hinder. Finally, at 10 minutes past 12, we returned to the courtroom. The murdered man stood directly opposite the jury box. his gaze fixed upon me with a deliberate intensity. Slowly, he lifted a gray veil he had not carried before and draped it over himself, covering his head and form entirely. And then, as I spoke the words "guilty," the veil collapsed, the figure vanished, and his place was empty. The murderer, asked by the judge whether he had anything to say before the sentence of death, muttered something indistinct, words which the papers later described as rambling, incoherent, and half-audible, complaining of unfairness because the foreman of the jury was biased. But what he truly declared was far stranger. "My lord," he said, his voice low and bitter, "I knew I was doomed the moment the foreman of my jury entered the box. My lord, I knew he would never let me escape, for before I was taken, he somehow came to my bedside in the night, woke me, and put a rope around my neck." The courtroom fell silent. The air seemed to thicken. Even the fog beyond the windows pressed in, as though the city itself had paused to listen. And in that moment, the truth of those 10 days, the quiet, unshakable presence that had shadowed every step, was finally revealed. The murdered man had been with us all along, guiding, watching, ensuring justice in ways that no living soul could fully comprehend.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.